Welcome, dear listener, to a place where mysteries come alive. Here, we bring you timeless tales of clever detectives, hidden motives, and unexpected twists. Whether it's the daring charm of Tommy and Tuppence, or the keen intellect of Poirot, every story invites you to think, to feel, and to solve the case. Stay curious, and welcome to Guardian of the Night Stories. The October rain pattered against the windows of the Beresford flat in Mayfair, with the gentle insistence of an unwanted guest. Inside, Tommy Beresford sat in his favourite armchair. The Times spread before him like a barricade against the responsibilities of the day, while his wife Tuppence prowled the sitting room with the restless energy of a caged lioness. "Nothing ever happens anymore," Tuppence declared, pausing dramatically by the mantelpiece. "Absolutely nothing." Tommy lowered his newspaper just enough to peer over the top. "My dear, we solved the Parkington affair only 3 months ago." 3 months! Tuppence threw up her hands. 3 entire months of domestic tranquility. I shall go mad, Tommy. Utterly, completely mad. You say that every Tuesday. It's Thursday, is it? Tommy consulted his watch with elaborate care. So it is. Well, that's something exciting. Tuppence was about to deliver what would undoubtedly have been a withering retort when the doorbell rang. She brightened instantly, like a plant given water after a drought. "I'll get it," she announced, already halfway to the door, before their housekeeper could emerge from the kitchen. Tommy sighed and folded his newspaper. Experience had taught him that when Tuppence moved with that particular speed, peace was about to be thoroughly shattered. A moment later, she returned, clutching a cream-coloured envelope with an expression of profound satisfaction. "Hand-delivered," she announced, "by a very nervous young man who wouldn't give his name and practically ran down the stairs afterward, probably spotted your expression and feared for his life." Tuppence ignored this jibe and tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery, the kind that whispered of old money and older secrets. She read aloud. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, I find myself in need of assistance regarding a matter of utmost delicacy. Would you be so kind as to visit Meadowbrook Manor, near the village of Ashford-on-Thames this weekend? I can promise you comfortable accommodations and, I believe, a puzzle that will interest Mrs. Beresford particularly. Your expenses will of course be covered. Yours in hope, Sylvia Marchmont." Tommy sat up straighter. "Sylvia Marchmont? The name sounds familiar." "Lady Marchmont," Tuppence supplied, her eyes scanning the letter again. "Widow of Sir Rowland Marchmont. I met her once at a charity function before the war. She must be well into her 70s by now. And she wants us this weekend. That's rather short notice, which means," Tuppence said with growing excitement, "that it's urgent. Oh, Tommy, say we'll go. Please say we'll go. I promise I won't complain about the weather or the food or anything for at least a week." "A week? 3 days? Done." Tommy rose from his chair and stretched. "Though I have a feeling you're going to break that promise before we even reach Ashford-on-Thames." "Nonsense. I'm perfectly capable of restraint when the situation demands it." Tommy wisely said nothing, but the smile playing at the corners of his mouth suggested volumes. By Friday afternoon, they were rattling along country roads in their somewhat temperamental motor car, the autumn countryside spreading out around them in shades of rust and gold. Tuppence had packed with characteristic efficiency, which meant she'd brought 3 different hats and forgotten her raincoat. "Tell me what you remember about Lady Marchmont," Tommy said as they passed through yet another picture-perfect village. Tuppence frowned in concentration. Formidable woman, lost her husband in the Great War. No, wait, it was after. Some sort of accident, I think. She has a reputation for being fiercely intelligent and utterly unflappable. If she's asking for help, something must have truly rattled her. Any children? A son, I believe. Richard? Robert? Something beginning with R. She waved a hand dismissively. I'm sure it will come back to me. The manor, when they finally arrived, proved to be a graceful Georgian house set in extensive grounds that had seen better days. The gardens showed signs of careful maintenance, fighting a losing battle against encroaching wilderness, and several windows on the upper floor were shuttered. Lady Marchmont herself met them at the door, and Tuppence was struck by how the years had diminished her. The formidable woman she remembered had become something more fragile, though her eyes still held that keen intelligence. Mrs. Beresford, Mr. Beresford, you came. I wasn't certain you would. Her voice was steady but carried an undertone of relief that suggested this uncertainty had cost her sleep. Your letter was intriguing, Tuppence said warmly. We're delighted to help in any way we can. Lady Marchmont's smile was brief. Come in, please. Tea is ready, and then I'll explain everything, or at least as much as I understand myself. The drawing-room was elegant, but showed the same signs of genteel decline as the exterior. Good furniture, but old. Fine paintings, but in need of cleaning. The tea service was Georgian silver, impeccably maintained. Once they were settled, Lady Marchmont got straight to the point. 3 weeks ago, I began receiving letters, she said. Anonymous letters. At first, I thought it was simply some unpleasant person amusing themselves. But then, she paused, her teacup trembling slightly in its saucer. But then they became specific. Too specific. She handed Tuppence a small bundle of letters tied with black ribbon. Tuppence untied them and began to read, her expression growing more serious with each one. The past never stays buried, she read from the first. Secrets have a way of surfacing, rather melodramatic. Read the last one, Lady Marchmont said quietly. Tuppence unfolded it and felt a chill despite the warm room. The rose garden remembers. 28 years, and the truth still waits. Pay what is owed, or everyone will know what you did that summer. Good Lord, Tommy muttered. That's not just melodrama. That's blackmail, but blackmail over what? Lady Marchmont spread her hands helplessly. 28 years ago would have been 1897. I was a young woman, newly married. We spent that summer here, as we did every summer. Nothing remarkable happened. Nothing scandalous, nothing criminal. And yet someone seems convinced otherwise. Have you any idea who might be sending these? Tuppence asked. None whatsoever. The postmarks are from London. Different districts each time. The handwriting is disguised, I'm certain of it. And as for who might remember anything from that summer, she shook her head. Most of the people who were here then are long dead. Who was here? Tommy asked practically. Lady Marchmont thought for a moment. My husband, of course. His cousin Arthur, who died in the Boer War. Arthur's wife Eleanor. She lives in the village now, a widow. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dawlish. But she's been dead these 10 years. Several servants whose names I can barely remember. She paused. And there was a young woman, a companion to me that summer. Sarah Whitmore. She left rather suddenly in August. I never saw her again. Left suddenly. Tuppence's instincts pricked up. Under what circumstances? I don't remember exactly. A family matter, I believe. She didn't give notice, just left in the night. Roland was quite put out about it, said it was inconsiderate. Lady Marchmont's brow furrowed. But that's hardly a scandal worth blackmailing someone over, is it? Perhaps not, Tuppence said slowly, studying the letters again. Lady Marchmont, you said you wanted our help. What exactly do you want us to do? The old woman's hands twisted in her lap. Find out who's sending these letters. Find out what they think they know. And she looked up, her eyes suddenly fierce. Tell me whether there's any truth to it. because I've been searching my memory for 3 weeks, and I cannot think of anything I did that summer that anyone could hold against me. Either I'm losing my mind, or someone is engaged in a very cruel game. I need to know which. As if on cue, a gong sounded somewhere in the depths of the house. "That will be dinner," Lady Marchmont said, standing with the careful dignity of someone determined not to show weakness. "I've invited several guests for the weekend, old friends and neighbours. I thought it might help, and it will seem less peculiar than having complete strangers question them." "Very sensible," Tommy approved. After she left to change for dinner, Tuppence turned to Tommy with gleaming eyes. Well, what? Don't be obtuse. What do you think?" Tommy considered. "I think someone knows something, or believes they do, about that summer. I think Lady Marchmont is genuinely baffled. And I think," he added, watching his wife's expression, "that you've already decided to solve this mystery." "Naturally," Tuppence said. "The question is, what really happened in the summer of 1897? And why does someone want to make Lady Marchmont pay for it now? Perhaps," Tommy said quietly, "we should also ask, what are they afraid will happen if she doesn't pay?" Outside, the October dusk was falling fast, and in the rose garden, now bare of everything but thorns and memories, a figure stood watching the lighted windows of the house, watching and waiting and remembering. Dinner at Meadowbrook Manor was a study in contrasts between past grandeur and present economy. The dining room itself was magnificent, with its coffered ceiling and ornate plasterwork, but the company was small, and several places at the long table remained conspicuously empty. Lady Marchmont presided with the ease of long practice, introducing each guest as they arrived. Tommy and Tuppence found themselves seated among a collection of individuals who seemed, on the surface, to have little in common beyond their connection to their hostess. "Dr. Ambrose Thornton," Lady Marchmont announced, gesturing to a lean man in his 60s with silver hair and observant grey eyes. "My physician and a dear friend of many years." "Delighted," Dr. Thornton murmured, shaking hands with a grip that was both gentle and assessing. "Lady Marchmont speaks very highly of you both." Next came Eleanor Fairfax, the widow of the cousin Lady Marchmont had mentioned. She was a comfortable-looking woman in her 70s, dressed in lavender and carrying herself with the slightly apologetic air of someone who had spent a lifetime in more forceful personality's shadows. "How lovely to have young people about the house again," she said, though Tommy and Tuppence, both in their 40s, hardly qualified as young. "Sylvia and I were just saying, weren't we, dear? How quiet it's become." "Indeed," said a new voice, and they turned to see a tall, angular woman of about 50 entering the room, though some of us prefer quiet to chaos. "My niece, Margaret Cavendish," Lady Marchmont said with a slight tightening around her mouth that suggested the relationship was not entirely harmonious. "Margaret, these are the Beresfords." Margaret Cavendish regarded them with cool blue eyes that took in every detail. "Yes, I've heard of you. You solve little mysteries, don't you? How quaint." Before Tuppence could formulate a suitably crushing response, a young man burst into the room with the apologetic energy of someone perpetually late. "Dreadfully sorry, Aunt Sylvia. The motor car broke down just past the village, and I had to walk the last mile." He was perhaps 30, with an open, pleasant face and slightly dishevelled fair hair. "You must be the famous Beresfords. I'm Roger Marchmont, Lady Marchmont's nephew, though technically third cousin twice removed, or some such nonsense." His arrival seemed to break the slight tension in the room, and soon they were all seated, working their way through a surprisingly good dinner, considering the obvious. Economies being practised, Tommy found himself seated between Eleanor Fairfax and Margaret Cavendish, an interesting juxtaposition of personalities. "Tell me, Mrs. Fairfax," he said, "have you lived in the village long?" "Oh, 30 years or more," she replied. "After Arthur died, I couldn't bear to stay in London. Sylvia was kind enough to let me take Ivy Cottage. It's just down the lane, you know. Terribly convenient." "You must know everyone in the area, then?" "Oh, yes, everyone." She lowered her voice confidentially, though not all of them are worth knowing, if you understand me. The village has changed rather since the war. New people, new ideas. On his other side, Margaret Cavendish gave a dismissive snort. "Eleanor means people who don't know their place. She's dreadfully old-fashioned. And you, Miss Cavendish?" Tommy inquired. "Do you live nearby as well?" "London mostly, but I'm frequently here. Someone needs to keep an eye on things." She shot a meaningful look at Lady Marchmont. The estate requires proper management. Across the table, Tuppence was engaged in conversation with Dr. Thornton. "You've been Lady Marchmont's physician for many years?" she asked. "Nearly 40, he replied. "I was quite young when I first came to the area, just setting up practice. Lady Marchmont was one of my first patients, though she was rarely ill. She's always had a remarkably strong constitution. Until recently." Dr. Thornton's expression became carefully neutral. "She's had some difficulties sleeping, natural enough at her age. Or," Tuppence suggested delicately, "when one is troubled by something." The doctor's eyes met hers, and she saw acknowledgment there. "Quite so, Mrs. Beresford, quite so." Roger Marchmont, who had been enthusiastically demolishing his dinner, suddenly spoke up. "I say, are you really here to investigate something? How tremendously exciting. Is it murder?" "Roger!" Lady Marchmont's voice was sharp. "Don't be absurd. Sorry. But one hears things, you know. The Beresfords and their cases. That business with the coded messages at the embassy, and the affair of the poisoned chocolates." "The chocolates were never actually poisoned," Tuppence corrected. "That was merely a theory." "Still, dashed clever work." Roger grinned. "If there's any investigating to be done around here, I'm your man. Know the area like the back of my hand. Really, Roger, you're being impossibly vulgar," Margaret Cavendish said icily. "The Beresfords are here as guests, nothing more." The look she shot Lady Marchmont suggested she suspected otherwise, and Tuppence filed this away for later consideration. After dinner, they gathered in the drawing-room for coffee. Lady Marchmont had arranged for some music. A young woman from the village came to play the piano, but the atmosphere remained subtly strained, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. Tuppence took the opportunity to drift toward Eleanor Fairfax, who was sitting slightly apart from the others. "Mrs. Fairfax, Lady Marchmont mentioned you've known her since you were young women. You must have wonderful memories of this place." Eleanor's face softened. "Oh, yes, my dear. This house was always so lively then. Grand parties, house guests coming and going. Arthur and Roland were such friends, you know. More like brothers, really. It must have been lovely." "It was." Though Eleanor hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. "Though not everything was pleasant. There were some difficult times too." "Oh?" But before Eleanor could elaborate, Margaret Cavendish appeared at Tuppence's elbow with the determined air of someone interrupting a conversation deliberately. "Mrs. Beresford, you must tell me about London. I've been away for nearly a month, and I'm desperate for news." Tuppence smiled and complied, but she noticed that Eleanor Fairfax slipped away shortly afterward, looking troubled. It was nearly 11 when the party began to break up. Dr. Thornton was the first to leave, citing an early call the next morning. Roger followed soon after, having apparently invited himself to stay at the village inn rather than impose on his aunt. though I'll be back bright and early for breakfast," he promised. Can't miss a moment of the excitement. As Margaret Cavendish made her way upstairs to her room, Tommy sidled up to Tuppence. "Interesting group," he murmured. "Very." Tuppence watched Eleanor Fairfax say her goodbyes to Lady Marchmont with what seemed like unusual warmth. Or perhaps anxiety. Everyone's on edge about something. The question is whether they're on edge about the same thing, or whether this house is harbouring multiple secrets. "In my experience," Tuppence said thoughtfully, "houses like this always harbour multiple secrets. The trick is determining which one matters." They retired to their room, a spacious chamber on the second floor with windows overlooking the rose garden. While Tommy prepared for bed, Tuppence stood at the window, looking out into the darkness. "Tommy, come look at this." He joined her at the window. At first, he saw nothing but the dark shapes of the garden below. Then he caught it, a flicker of light moving among the rose bushes. "Someone's out there," he said quietly, "with a lantern by the look of it." Tuppence's eyes gleamed with excitement. Searching for something, perhaps? Or leaving something to be found? They watched for several minutes, but the light disappeared behind a hedge and didn't reappear. When Tommy went to the door, intending to investigate, Tuppence stopped him. "Not yet. If they're searching for something, let them finish. We can investigate in daylight. Besides," she added practically, "we don't know the grounds, and stumbling about in the dark will only alert whoever's out there that they're being watched." Tommy reluctantly agreed, though he made a thorough check of their door lock before finally settling down. Sleep came slowly to Tuppence. She lay in the darkness thinking about anonymous letters and summers long past, about nervous neighbours and watchful nieces, about a young woman who had disappeared in the night 28 years ago. And somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. Footsteps, careful and quiet, passed their door and continued down the corridor. Tuppence counted slowly to 60, then slipped out of bed and eased the door open just enough to peer into the hallway. A figure in a dark dressing gown was descending the main staircase, moving with the confidence of someone who knew every creaking board. She couldn't see who it was, but she could make a reasonable guess. Closing the door silently, she returned to bed. "Well?" Tommy whispered. "Well," Tuppence replied, "I think tomorrow is going to be a very interesting day indeed." And in the rose garden below, undisturbed by midnight visitors or watching windows, the autumn wind rattled through dead stems and whispered secrets that only the darkness could hear. The morning dawned grey and cold, with mist hanging over the gardens like a shroud. Tuppence was up early, despite the late night, and was dressed and downstairs before the breakfast gong sounded. The rose garden looked different in daylight, less sinister, more simply neglected. The beds were overgrown, the paths mossy with disuse. But someone had been here recently. The signs were subtle but unmistakable. Footprints in the soft earth around the central fountain, and at the base of one particular rosebush, the soil had been disturbed. Tuppence knelt and examined the spot carefully. Someone had been digging here, and recently. The earth was loose, and when she probed gently with a stick she'd picked up, she felt something solid a few inches down. "Looking for buried treasure, Mrs. Beresford?" She straightened quickly to find Dr. Thornton approaching along the path, his medical bag in hand. "Just admiring the garden," she said smoothly, "though I imagine it was quite something in its prime." Indeed it was. The doctor paused beside her, his eyes surveying the neglected beds. "I remember when Lady Marchmont used to host garden parties here. This was the jewel of the county." He gestured toward the bush where she'd been investigating. "That one is particularly old. A damask rose planted by Roland's grandmother, I believe. Ispahan, they call it. Remarkably hardy. You have a good memory for roses, Doctor. For details generally." His smile was slightly rueful. "It's necessary in my profession, though sometimes I think remembering too much can be as troublesome as forgetting." Before Tuppence could pursue this intriguing comment, they were interrupted by a commotion from the house, raised voices, and then the sound of someone crying. They hurried back to find the household in disarray. Lady Marchmont stood in the entrance hall, her face pale, while Margaret Cavendish attempted to comfort a young maid who was sobbing into her apron. "What happened?" Tuppence demanded. Lady Marchmont held up a paper with shaking hands. "Another letter, but this time," she faltered, and it was Margaret who finished. "This time it was delivered here. Left on the hall table sometime during the night. Mary found it when she came down to lay the fires." Tommy had appeared from the dining room, and Tuppence handed him the letter. Unlike the previous ones, this was written in block capitals on common paper. "Your guests won't save you. The truth will out. The Rose Garden remembers what you did. Pay $500 by Monday, or everyone will know about Sarah Whitmore." "Good Lord," Tommy muttered. "This is escalating rather quickly." "Sarah Whitmore," Eleanor Fairfax said from the doorway. Everyone turned to look at her. She stood there in her coat and hat, having apparently just arrived. "I haven't heard that name in years. You remember her?" Lady Marchmont asked urgently. "Of course. She was your companion that summer. The summer of 1897. Eleanor came further into the hall, unbuttoning her coat. "Pretty girl, rather quiet. She left suddenly, didn't she?" "Yes, but why?" Lady Marchmont pressed. "Why did she leave? I've been trying to remember, but it's all so vague." Eleanor frowned. "I don't recall exactly. There was some sort of fuss. Arthur and Roland had words about it, I remember that. Arthur thought Roland had been—" She paused delicately. "Too friendly with the girl." A shocked silence fell. "That's nonsense," Lady Marchmont said sharply. "Roland would never—" "I'm sure it was nothing," Eleanor said hastily. "Arthur was always rather quick to take offence, and Sarah left of her own accord after all. There was no scandal. But someone, Tommy pointed out, seems to think there was." Dr. Thornton cleared his throat. "Sylvia, I really think we should notify the police. This has gone beyond anonymous letters. Someone entered your house during the night. No police." Lady Marchmont's vehemence surprised them all. "I won't have it. The scandal alone would be unbearable, and for what? Some malicious person writing letters? The Beresfords can handle it discreetly." "Can we?" Tuppence murmured to Tommy. "We'd better try," he murmured back. Roger Marchmont arrived at that moment, breezing in with his usual cheerful energy that seemed almost jarring in the tense atmosphere. "Good morning, all. What a marvellous day for—" He stopped, taking in the assembled group and their expressions. "I say, what's wrong? Someone looks like they've seen a ghost." "Someone's playing ghost, more likely," Margaret Cavendish said crisply. "Another of these wretched letters has appeared." "Letters?" Roger looked confused. "What letters?" There was a slight pause, and Tuppence realised that Roger, at least, had been kept in the dark about the blackmail attempts. Lady Marchmont made a quick decision. "Nothing important, Roger. Just some unpleasant correspondence. Now, shall we all have breakfast? Standing about won't solve anything." But breakfast was a subdued affair. Even Roger seemed to sense that something serious was afoot, though he made several attempts to lighten the mood with amusing anecdotes that fell rather flat. Afterward, Tommy and Tuppence requested a private word with Lady Marchmont. They gathered in the library, a handsome room lined with leather-bound books that had clearly gone unread for years. "Lady Marchmont," Tommy began gently, "we need you to tell us everything you remember about Sarah Whitmore and that summer, no matter how trivial or potentially embarrassing." The old woman sank into a chair. "I've been trying to remember. Sarah came to me through an agency in London. She was 19, I think, or perhaps 20. Educated, well-spoken. She was meant to be my companion, to read to me, help with correspondence, that sort of thing." "And was she satisfactory?" Tuppence asked. "Very. She was quiet, perhaps a bit melancholy, but efficient. We got along well enough." Lady Marchmont paused. "She was pretty, not beautiful precisely, but there was something appealing about her." "And your husband noticed this?" "Roland noticed all pretty women. It was harmless. He was a terrible flirt, but that's all it was. He would never have actually—" She trailed off, but her hands twisted in her lap. "What happened the night she left?" Tommy pressed. "I don't know. That's the terrible thing. I truly don't know. We had a small dinner party that evening. Nothing elaborate, just family and close neighbours. Sarah helped me dress, and then she had the evening to herself. The next morning, she was gone. She left a note saying a family emergency had called her away." "Do you still have the note?" "No. I had no reason to keep it. It was perfectly ordinary, apologetic, brief." "Who else was at that dinner party?" Tuppence asked. Lady Marchmont closed her eyes, thinking. "Roland and myself, of course. Arthur and Eleanor. Dr. Thornton. Yes, he was there, and—" She opened her eyes. "Margaret's parents. They're both dead now, but Margaret was there too. She would have been about 22. She and Sarah were close in age. Were they friends?" "I don't think so. Margaret was rather dismissive of Sarah, as I recall. She had ambitions of her own and little patience for companions and governesses." A knock on the door interrupted them. It was the maid Mary, looking nervous. "Begging your pardon, my lady, but there's a constable here to see you." "A constable?" Lady Marchmont went pale. "But I didn't— He's not here about the letters," Mary said quickly. "It's about Mrs. Fairfax. There's been an accident." They found Eleanor Fairfax in the morning room, attended by Dr. Thornton and a worried-looking village constable. Her face was bruised and her right arm was in a makeshift sling. "Eleanor, my dear, what happened?" Lady Marchmont rushed to her side. "It was the silliest thing," Eleanor said, though her voice shook. "I was walking back to the cottage after breakfast, and I took the shortcut through the woods. Something or someone pushed me. I fell quite badly." "Pushed you?" Tommy said sharply. "You're certain it wasn't simply a slip?" "I know the difference between tripping and being pushed, Mr. Beresford," Eleanor said with a touch of asperity. "Someone came up behind me and shoved me hard. I didn't see who it was. I was too busy trying not to break my neck." The constable, a young man who looked somewhat out of his depth, cleared his throat. "The doctor says Mrs. Fairfax is quite right. The nature of her injuries is consistent with having been pushed from behind. But she didn't see anyone, and there's no evidence at the scene." "This is ridiculous," Margaret Cavendish said from the doorway. She'd appeared with her usual uncanny timing. First mysterious letters, now assaults in broad daylight. "Aunt Sylvia, this has gone too far. You must call the police properly." "The constable is the police," Roger pointed out. "The real police. Scotland Yard. I hardly think Scotland Yard concerns itself with old ladies falling in the woods," the constable said stiffly. "Old ladies being pushed," Eleanor corrected. "And I may be old, constable, but I'm not senile." Dr. Thornton intervened. "I think what Mrs. Fairfax needs now is rest. Sylvia, might Eleanor stay here for a day or two? I'd like to keep her under observation, and Ivy Cottage is rather isolated." "Of course," Lady Marchmont said immediately. "Eleanor, you'll stay in the blue room. I won't hear any argument." As the household fussed over Eleanor and arrangements were made for her comfort, Tuppence drew Tommy aside. "This is no longer just blackmail," she said quietly. "Someone is getting desperate, but whether they're desperate to keep the truth hidden or to expose it, I'm not certain." "Neither am I," Tommy admitted, "but I think we'd better find out quickly before someone gets hurt worse than a few bruises. Or before someone doesn't survive the next accident at all." That afternoon, while the household settled into an uneasy routine, Tommy and Tuppence returned to the rose garden. This time, Tuppence brought a small trowel, borrowed from the garden shed. She dug carefully at the spot where the earth had been disturbed, and within minutes, her trowel struck something solid. A few more careful scrapes revealed a small metal box, green with age and corrosion. Tommy lifted it out and tried the clasp. It opened with surprising ease, revealing its contents. A bundle of letters tied with a faded pink ribbon, and a small photograph. The photograph showed a young woman in the fashion of the 1890s, her face solemn and sweet. On the back, in careful handwriting, was written, "Sarah Whitmore, August 1897. "Well," Tuppence said softly, "I think we've just found our missing companion." "The question," Tommy said, examining the letters, "is why she buried these here, and whether she ever came back for them." "And whether," Tuppence added grimly, "she's the one sending the blackmail letters now, or whether someone else found them first." As they carried their discovery back to the house, neither of them noticed the figure watching from an upper window, or the way that figure's hands clenched white-knuckled on the window frame before the curtain fell swiftly back into place. The letters proved to be less immediately illuminating than Tommy and Tuppence had hoped. They were love letters, passionate, earnest, and signed only with the initial R. But whether R stood for Roland or Roger, or some other name entirely, there was no way to tell from the contents alone. "Listen to this," Tuppence said, sitting cross-legged on their bed that afternoon while Tommy paced. "My dearest, I cannot continue this deception much longer. Every moment in the same house as her is torture, knowing I cannot claim you openly. But soon, my darling, soon we shall be free." Rather melodramatic. "Most love letters are," Tommy observed. "The question is whether these were written to Sarah or by her." "By, I should think. The handwriting is feminine." Tuppence held one up to the light. "And look, this paper is expensive. Not the sort of thing a companion would have used for casual correspondence." So Sarah was in love with someone who was married, or at least someone who wasn't free to claim her. Tommy stopped pacing. Could it have been Roland Marchmont? Lady Marchmont seems genuinely bewildered by the whole business. Either she's an excellent actress, or she truly knew nothing about any affair. Or, Tommy suggested, the affair was with someone else entirely. Remember, there were several people at that dinner party the night Sarah disappeared. They had laid the letters out chronologically. The earliest was dated June 1897, the latest mid-August, just days before Sarah Whitmore had vanished. "The tone changes," Tuppence noted, studying them. "The early letters are hopeful, almost giddy, but by August there's desperation. Listen, you promised me we would leave together, but now you speak of duty and honour, words I once thought noble but now see as chains. If you will not keep your promise, then I shall be forced to take matters into my own hands." That sounds rather like a threat, doesn't it? And here's the last one, dated August 20th. "I have made my decision. Tomorrow I shall speak to her, and let the consequences be what they may. I cannot live this lie any longer. If you will not stand by me, I shall stand alone." And the next day she was gone. Tommy frowned. Did she speak to Lady Marchmont? Is that what caused her to leave? Or, Tuppence said slowly, did she speak to someone else? Someone who had more to lose from the revelation? A knock at the door interrupted them. They hastily gathered the letters and tucked them away before admitting Margaret Cavendish, who entered with her usual brisk efficiency. "I've been thinking about this business," she announced without preamble, "and I believe I may have some information that could help." She sat without being invited, folding her hands in her lap, with the air of someone about to make a confession. That summer, 1897, I was here for several weeks. My parents were alive then, and we were frequent visitors. I was young, ambitious, and rather foolish. She paused. I was also desperately in love with Roland Marchmont. Tuppence and Tommy exchanged glances, but said nothing. Roland was older, married, and completely oblivious to my feelings naturally, but I watched him, rather obsessively if I'm honest, and I saw how he looked at Sarah Whitmore. How did he look at her? Tuppence asked gently. Margaret's expression was bitter. The way I wanted him to look at me, with interest, with desire. They were discreet, but I noticed. Little exchanges of glances, moments when their hands would brush. By August, I was certain they were conducting an affair. Did you tell anyone? No, I was too proud, and too hopeful that it would burn itself out, that he would realize. She shook her head. Foolish, as I said. But then Sarah left, and everything returned to normal. Or so it seemed. Did you ever discover what happened to her? Tommy asked. No, and I confess I didn't care. I was simply relieved she was gone. Margaret stood abruptly. I'm telling you this now, because if someone is using that summer to blackmail Aunt Sylvia, it's probably because they know about Roland and Sarah. And if that knowledge becomes public, it will devastate her. Whatever my feelings about Roland, Sylvia deserves better. After she left, Tuppence turned to Tommy with raised eyebrows. Well, that was unexpectedly honest, or unexpectedly calculated. Tommy countered. She's given us information that points away from her and directly at a man who's been dead for years and can't defend himself, true, though I got the sense she was being sincere about her feelings for Roland. Jealous young women have been known to do desperate things when disappointed in love, Tommy pointed out. They spent the rest of the afternoon interviewing the others separately. Dr. Thornton received them in the library, settling into a chair with the weariness of someone who had been working since dawn. Sarah Whitmore, he said thoughtfully when they asked. Yes, I remember her. Pretty girl, but troubled. Troubled how? Tuppence asked. There was a sadness about her, a sense that she was carrying some burden. I noticed it particularly because she was otherwise quite healthy, young, robust, but there was something eating at her from the inside. Did she ever confide in you? No, I wasn't her physician, strictly speaking, though I gave her some sleeping powders once when she complained of insomnia. He paused. I do remember one thing. The day before she left, I encountered her in the garden. She seemed agitated, kept looking back at the house. When I asked if she was quite well, she said something odd. She said, "The truth is like a seed, Dr. Thornton. Once planted, it will grow whether we wish it to or not." What do you think she meant? At the time, I thought she was being philosophical, but in retrospect, he spread his hands. Perhaps she meant that she had set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. Eleanor Fairfax, still recovering in the blue room, with her arm properly bandaged, was more reticent. I barely knew the girl, she insisted. She was Sylvia's companion, not mine. Though I will say, she added reluctantly, that Arthur seemed quite taken with her. Your husband was interested in Sarah Whitmore? Tommy asked carefully. Don't look so shocked. Arthur was human, and he'd always had an appreciative eye for a pretty face. But it was Roland who worried me. In what way? Roland was complicated. He loved Sylvia, I'm certain of that. But he also had what you might call a wandering eye. And that summer, his eyes seemed to wander rather frequently in Sarah's direction. She picked at the bandage on her arm. I mentioned it to Arthur once, and we quarrelled. He accused me of being jealous and causing trouble. We didn't speak for nearly a week. This was before Sarah left. Just before. And then she was gone, and everything settled down. Arthur and I made our peace, and we never spoke of it again. She looked up at them. Whatever happened that summer, it's all in the past. Why can't people let it stay there? That evening, Roger Marchmont cornered them before dinner, his usual cheerfulness subdued. "Look here," he said. "Margaret told me about the letters and the blackmail business. Aunt Sylvia didn't want me to know, but Margaret thought I should. Is it true someone's threatening her over something that happened decades ago?" "I'm afraid so," Tuppence confirmed, "but that's absurd. Aunt Sylvia is one of the kindest, most upright people I know. She couldn't possibly have done anything scandalous." "Perhaps not," Tommy said. "But someone thinks she did. Roger, you live in the area. Have you heard any gossip or rumours about your aunt or your uncle?" Roger looked uncomfortable. "There are always rumours in villages, but nothing specific. Uncle Roland died before I was born, so I only know him through stories. But by all accounts, he was a good man, generous, well-liked. And Sarah Whitmore? Have you ever heard that name?" "Never. Who was she?" They explained briefly, and Roger's face grew thoughtful. "A companion who left suddenly. That is odd, isn't it? In those days, people didn't just leave positions without notice unless something serious had happened." "Exactly what we've been thinking," Tuppence said. Roger was quiet for a moment. "My father once said something. It was years ago when I was quite young. He mentioned that Uncle Roland had been involved in some sort of scandal in the 1890s, but that it had been handled discreetly. I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed he meant financial troubles or something of that sort. But now I wonder, your father is deceased?" Tommy asked. "Died 10 years ago. Mother too," Roger smiled sadly. "They were both quite elderly when I came along. A late surprise, Father used to say, after dinner, when the household had retired early, the day's events having exhausted everyone." Tommy and Tuppence compared notes in their room. 3 different people, Tuppence said, all suggesting that Roland Marchmont was interested in Sarah Whitmore. Margaret thought they were having an affair. Eleanor suspected something. Even Dr. Thornton implied she was troubled by something. "But the letters don't mention Roland by name," Tommy pointed out. "They're signed R, yes, but that could be anyone." "Could be Arthur," Tuppence mused. "Eleanor's husband? He was here that summer, and Eleanor said he was quite taken with Sarah." "Could be Roger," Tommy suggested. "Roger Senior, that is, the father of our young Roger. He was here too, apparently. Or someone whose name didn't begin with R at all. People use false initials in secret correspondence." Tommy went to the window and looked out at the darkened garden. "What I don't understand is why someone would bury these letters in the rose garden. If Sarah wanted to keep them secret, why not take them with her when she left? And if she wanted to expose the affair, why not simply show them to Lady Marchmont? Unless," Tuppence said slowly, "she buried them as insurance, planning to come back for them if needed, but leaving them here as proof if anything happened to her." "Proof of what, though? An affair? That's hardly grounds for blackmail 28 years later." "No," Tuppence agreed. "But what if it wasn't just an affair? What if there was something more? something that would still matter today. They sat in thoughtful silence for a moment. Then Tuppence suddenly sat up straight. "Tommy, what if Sarah Whitmore didn't just leave? What if something happened to her? You think she's dead?" "I think it's possible. She buries the letters as evidence, plans to confront someone the next day, and then vanishes. What if the confrontation went badly? What if someone killed her to keep her quiet? But then who wrote the note saying she'd left because of a family emergency?" "Her killer," Tuppence said grimly, "to cover their tracks." Tommy looked skeptical. "That's quite a theory, and it doesn't explain who's sending the blackmail letters now, or how they know about the affair." "No," Tuppence admitted, "but I think we need to find out what really happened to Sarah Whitmore, where she went, whether she's still alive, and if not, how she died." "That's a tall order after 28 years. Then we'd better start tomorrow," Tuppence said. "First thing, before whoever's behind this decides that pushing Eleanor down a hill wasn't quite effective enough, and tries something more permanent." Outside their window, the moon had risen over the gardens, silvering the neglected rosebeds and casting long shadows. In one of those shadows, something moved, a figure, watching and waiting, but whether they were guarding secrets or hunting for them, even the moonlight couldn't reveal. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, the sort of autumn day that makes everything sharp and bright. Tommy and Tuppence rose early, determined to make progress before another incident could occur. Their first stop was the village church, where the ancient register of births, deaths, and marriages offered a starting point for their investigation. The vicar, a genial man in his 60s named Reverend Hartley, was only too happy to assist. "Sarah Whitmore, you say? From 1897? He thumbed through the dusty register. "We don't have a death recorded for anyone by that name. Of course, if she left the area, she might have died elsewhere. What about marriages?" Tuppence asked. "Ah, now that's interesting." He ran his finger down a page. "We do have a marriage here in September 1897. Sarah Whitmore to... Good heavens, to whom?" Tommy prompted. "To Arthur Fairfax." Reverend Hartley looked up at them with surprise. "Eleanor's late husband? But that can't be right. Arthur married Eleanor in 1895. I've seen that entry myself." "May we see it?" Tuppence asked, her heart beginning to race. The vicar turned the pages back. There, in careful Victorian script, was the entry. "Arthur James Fairfax to Eleanor Margaret Hardwicke, 23rd June 1895. And 2 years later, Arthur James Fairfax to Sarah Mary Whitmore, 15th September 1897. "Bigamy," Tommy breathed. "It would appear so," Reverend Hartley said, clearly scandalized. "Though I can't imagine how Arthur managed it. The banns would have been read. Witnesses required. Someone must have known." "Unless," Tuppence said, "he gave a false name for the first marriage. Or the second." They examined both entries more closely. The handwriting was different. Different vicars, presumably. The witnesses for Eleanor's marriage were Roland Marchmont and a woman named Alice Hardwicke, probably Eleanor's sister. The witnesses for Sarah's marriage were listed as Roland Marchmont and Margaret Cavendish. Roland witnessed both marriages, Tommy noted. He must have known. And Margaret witnessed the second one. She would have been what, 22? Old enough to understand what she was witnessing. They thanked the vicar and made their way back to Meadowbrook Manor, their minds racing with this new information. "Arthur Fairfax," Tuppence said as they walked. Not Roland at all. The R in the letters stood for Roland. But he wasn't the lover. He was the accomplice. And Eleanor knew nothing about it, presumably. Or did she? If she did, she's kept it quiet for nearly 3 decades. But why would Arthur commit bigamy? He was already married. Why risk everything for Sarah? they found their answer in the most unlikely of places, tucked inside one of the books in the library at Meadowbrook Manor. Tuppence had been searching the shelves, looking for any volumes that might have belonged to Sarah, when a slim journal fell from behind a row of books. It was Sarah's diary. They took it to their room and read it together, the faded ink revealing a story both sad and shocking. Sarah had come to Meadowbrook Manor not as a simple companion, but as someone with a specific purpose. She was searching for information about her mother, who had been a maid at the house years before and had died in mysterious circumstances. August 3rd, 1897. Tuppence read aloud. I have been here nearly 2 months, and still I am no closer to the truth. Mother's death was recorded as an accident, a fall from the cliffs. But I know she would never have walked so close to the edge. She was terrified of heights. Someone must know what really happened, but all refused to speak of it. Even Mrs. Dawlish, who was here then, changes the subject whenever I mention Mother's name. The entries became more frantic as August progressed. Sarah had become convinced that her mother had been murdered, and that someone in the house knew the truth. August 15th. Tommy read. A has promised to help me. He says he knows something of what happened, and that if I marry him, he will make certain I am provided for, and he will use his influence to uncover the truth. I am not certain I love him, but what does love matter when justice is at stake? R has agreed to help us keep the marriage secret until the time is right. He feels responsible, he says, though he will not explain why. So Arthur offered her marriage and information, Tuppence said. But he was already married. Why would he do such a thing? The answer came in the next entry. August 18th. The truth is worse than I imagined. A. Confessed tonight that it was Roland who was responsible for Mother's death, though it was an accident. Mother had discovered some financial irregularity. R had been embezzling from the estate to cover gambling debts. She threatened to tell Lady Marchmont. R confronted her, they argued, and in the struggle she fell from the window of the East Tower. It was ruled an accident because R paid the coroner to say so. A knew because he witnessed it, but he was young and frightened and said nothing. Now he wants to make amends by helping me, by ensuring I am cared for. But at what cost? Good Lord, Tommy said quietly. So Roland Marchmont killed Sarah's mother, and Arthur knew about it. And Arthur married Sarah to keep her quiet, Tuppence added, probably promising her that justice would come later, or money, or both. But it was bigamy, which means the marriage wasn't legal. Which means Sarah had nothing. No marriage, no justice, no security. The final entries were brief and increasingly desperate. August 20th. I have made my decision. Tomorrow I will confront R directly. I will tell him I know what he did, and that unless he confesses and makes restitution, I will go to the authorities. A begs me not to, says it is too dangerous, but I cannot live with this knowledge and do nothing. And then, in a shaking hand, August 21st morning, I am leaving this diary here, hidden, in case anything happens to me. Tonight I will meet R in the rose garden. He has agreed to talk. A will be there as well, as witness. If I do not return to retrieve this diary, then someone must know the truth. Roland Marchmont is a murderer and a thief, and if I am found dead, he will have killed again. There were no more entries. Tuppence closed the diary slowly. She never came back for it. Because she couldn't, Tommy said grimly. The question is, what happened in the rose garden that night? They looked at each other, the implications sinking in. If Roland killed Sarah, Tuppence said. Then Arthur would have witnessed it. That's why he kept quiet all these years. He was complicit, or he participated, Tommy suggested. 2 men would have had an easier time disposing of a body than one. But Arthur died in the Boer War. That's what Lady Marchmont said. Did he? Tommy stood and began to pace. Or is that what everyone was told? When exactly did he die? They went downstairs to find Eleanor Fairfax in the morning room, still recovering, but looking somewhat better. She smiled at them as they entered. "Good morning. I'm feeling much improved, thank you." "Mrs. Fairfax," Tuppence said gently, sitting beside her. "We need to ask you about your husband. When exactly did he die?" Eleanor's smile faded. "In 1899, he was with his regiment in South Africa." "Why? How did you receive the news?" "A telegram from his commanding officer. And then his personal effects were sent to me." She looked between them, growing alarmed. "Why are you asking about Arthur?" Tommy made a decision. "Mrs. Fairfax, we have reason to believe your husband may have been involved in something serious that summer of 1897. Something involving Sarah Whitmore." To their surprise, Eleanor didn't seem shocked. Instead, she slowly nodded. "I've been expecting this conversation for 28 years, she said quietly. "When I heard about the blackmail letters, I wondered if the past had finally caught up with us." "You knew?" Tuppence said. "Not everything, but I knew something had happened. Arthur was different after that August. Nervous, distracted. He would wake from nightmares, and he was desperate to leave England. That's why he volunteered for South Africa. He said he wanted to serve his country, but I think he was running away." "Did he ever tell you what happened?" Eleanor shook her head. "He said it was better if I didn't know. He made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I would stay close to Sylvia, that I would watch over her. I thought it was because they had been such friends, he and Roland. But now I wonder if it was guilt." "Arthur married Sarah Whitmore," Tommy said quietly, "in September 1897, even though he was already married to you." Eleanor went pale. "Bigamy, but why?" "We believe it was to keep her quiet about something she'd discovered. Something about Roland Marchmont." What could Sarah have known that was worth committing bigamy? Tuppence hesitated, then decided Eleanor deserved the truth. She explained about Sarah's mother, about the embezzlement and the murder, about the diary they'd found. When she finished, Eleanor sat in silence for a long moment. "So Roland killed Sarah's mother," she said finally. "And then when Sarah threatened to expose him, he—" "What, killed her too?" "We believe so," Tommy said. "And we believe Arthur helped him, or at least covered it up." "But where is she?" Eleanor asked. "If they killed her, what did they do with her body?" It was the question that had been haunting them as well. "The rose garden," Tuppence said slowly. "Sarah's diary said she was meeting Roland in the rose garden that night, and the blackmail letters keep mentioning the rose garden. The rose garden remembers," they said. Tommy understood immediately. "You think she's buried there?" "I think it's possible, and I think whoever is sending these letters knows it." They returned to the rose garden, this time with purpose. The spot where they'd found the metal box was near the old Ispahan rose that Dr. Thornton had mentioned. But what if there was more buried there than just letters and a diary? Tommy fetched a proper spade from the garden shed, and they began to dig, carefully but thoroughly. Eleanor, despite her injuries, insisted on coming with them, leaning heavily on Tuppence's arm. They had dug perhaps 2 feet down when Tommy's spade struck something solid. Not metal this time, but something that made a different sound. A hollow sound. Working more carefully, they uncovered it. A wooden box, plain and simple, about 3 feet long. "Don't open it," Eleanor whispered. "Please don't open it." But they had to know. Tommy pried off the lid and they all looked inside. It wasn't a body. Instead, the box contained more personal effects. A hairbrush, a locket, several items of clothing neatly folded, and a bundle of papers. "Her belongings," Tuppence said. "They buried her belongings, but not her." Tommy was examining the papers. "These are legal documents. A birth certificate for Sarah Mary Whitmore, a certificate of marriage, the bigamous one, and this," he pulled out a final paper. "This is a death certificate for Sarah Whitmore, dated September 1899. Place of death, Cape Town, South Africa." "South Africa," Eleanor breathed. "The same time and place Arthur died." "Or didn't die," Tuppence said quietly. "Mrs. Fairfax, I don't think your husband died in the Boer War. I think he ran away to South Africa with Sarah, and they've been living there ever since." The implications hung in the air like smoke. "But then who sent the telegram?" Eleanor asked faintly. "Who sent his effects?" "Someone who wanted everyone to believe he was dead," Tommy said. "Someone who helped them disappear." "Roland," Eleanor whispered. "It was always Roland, and suddenly the pieces fell into place. Roland had helped Arthur and Sarah stage Arthur's death, helped them flee to South Africa, ensured they could never return. In exchange, they would never reveal what they knew about the first murder. "But Roland himself is dead now," Tuppence said. "So who's sending the blackmail letters? And what do they really want?" Before anyone could answer, a voice spoke from behind them. "I think I can answer that." They turned to find Dr. Thornton standing at the edge of the rose garden, his face grave. "I think it's time," he said quietly, "that I told you what I really know about the summer of 1897, and why I've kept silent for so long." Dr. Thornton led them back to the library, checking carefully that they weren't overheard. The house was quiet. Lady Marchmont was resting. Margaret had driven to the village, and Roger had gone for a walk after breakfast. Once they were settled, the doctor poured himself a whisky with shaking hands, unusual for a man typically so composed. "I was young," he began without preamble, "only 26, fresh from medical school, eager to build a practice, when Roland Marchmont offered to become my patron, to recommend me to all the best families in the county. I was overwhelmed with gratitude. I would have done anything for him." He took a long drink. "In August of 1897, Roland summoned me to Meadowbrook Manor late one night. He said there had been an accident, that a girl had fallen in the rose garden and struck her head. When I arrived, I found Sarah Whitmore lying unconscious among the roses. She had a serious head injury, but she was alive." "Alive?" Tuppence leaned forward. "Then what happened to her?" "Roland told me that Sarah had been hysterical, that she'd attacked him with wild accusations about a maid's death years before, that she'd threatened to ruin him, and when he tried to reason with her, she'd fallen. He said it was an accident, but that if word got out, there would be a scandal. He asked me to take her away somewhere she could recover quietly, somewhere no one would connect her to Meadowbrook Manor." "And you agreed?" Tommy said flatly. "I agreed." Dr. Thornton's voice was heavy with old shame. "I told myself I was helping them both. Sarah would recover, Roland would be protected, and no one would be hurt. I arranged for her to be taken to a private hospital in London that asked no questions. I told them she was a servant who'd had a fall, and I paid her expenses myself. Or rather, Roland paid them through me." "Did she recover?" Eleanor asked. "Yes and no. She regained consciousness after a few days, but she had no memory of the fall or what had preceded it. The head injury had caused amnesia. She remembered her name, her childhood, but everything from that summer at Meadowbrook Manor was gone." "How convenient for Roland," Tuppence said coldly. "I know how it sounds. I know how it was. But at the time I told myself it was a blessing. She couldn't remember the accusations, couldn't remember the confrontation. She could start fresh. He met their eyes miserably. I was a coward and a fool. What happened to her? Tommy pressed. I kept track of her for several years. She was placed with a family in London as a companion. She was capable of work, just couldn't remember that specific summer. Then the family emigrated to Australia, and Sarah went with them. I lost touch after that. For years I told myself she must have lived a good life, that perhaps it had all worked out for the best. And Arthur? Eleanor's voice was strained. What about my husband? Arthur was there that night in the rose garden. He tried to stop Roland from moving Sarah, said they should call for help properly. But Roland convinced him that doing so would ruin everyone. Himself, Sarah, even Arthur for his bigamous marriage. In the end, Arthur agreed to flee to South Africa. Roland arranged everything, including the fake death. And you covered it all up, Tommy said. Every bit of it. Yes. Dr. Thornton's shoulders sagged. I convinced myself I was being pragmatic, sophisticated, that these things happened in society and were handled discreetly. But I was just protecting a violent man and my own career. I've lived with that guilt for nearly 3 decades. Then who, Tuppence demanded, is sending the blackmail letters? If Sarah doesn't remember, and Roland is dead, and Arthur is in South Africa. Arthur is dead. Eleanor interrupted quietly. That death certificate you found was genuine. I never knew about South Africa. But Sarah's certificate was dated 1899. If my husband was with her, he must have died the same year. The point, Tommy said, is that someone else knows the whole story. Someone who has decided 28 years later to make Lady Marchmont pay for her husband's crimes. The letters don't actually mention murder, Tuppence mused. They talk about secrets and payment. What if the blackmailer doesn't know everything? What if they only know part of the story? Then we need to figure out what they do know and how they learned it, Tommy said. Dr. Thornton cleared his throat. There's something else. Something that happened this morning that I think you should know about. I received a message pushed under my door during the night. He handed them a slip of paper. In the same block capitals as the blackmail letters, it read, "The doctor knows. If he speaks, you'll wish you'd paid." They're threatening you now too, Tuppence said, which means they know you were involved. But how? Dr. Thornton's bewilderment seemed genuine. I never told anyone. Roland died 5 years ago, taking his secrets with him. Arthur was long gone. Who could possibly know? Someone who was here that summer, Tommy suggested. Someone who saw or heard something. Margaret, Eleanor said suddenly. Margaret witnessed Arthur's marriage to Sarah. She must have known it was bigamous. And she was in love with Roland. She admitted as much. She would have been watching him closely. But why wait 28 years? Tuppence objected. And why blackmail Lady Marchmont instead of simply revealing the truth? Money, Dr. Thornton said bluntly. The estate is in financial difficulty. Everyone in the village knows it. Margaret has been pressuring Sylvia to sell off parcels of land to economize further. If Sylvia paid the blackmail, Margaret would benefit as the primary heir. Rather cold-blooded, Tommy observed, to blackmail one's own aunt. Margaret is nothing if not practical, Eleanor said with a trace of bitterness. She's always resented that Roland left everything to Sylvia rather than family. She believes the estate should have come to her father, Roland's cousin. Before they could pursue this line of thought further, a scream shattered the quiet of the house. They rushed into the hallway to find Mary the maid standing at the top of the stairs, her hand pressed to her mouth, staring at something in the corridor above. Tommy took the stairs 2 at a time, with Tuppence close behind. What they found made them both stop short. Someone had vandalized the portrait gallery. 3 large paintings had been slashed. Methodically, violently, the canvas hanging in ribbons. But it was the subjects of the paintings that made the attack significant. All 3 were of Roland Marchmont. "This is escalating," Tommy said quietly as Lady Marchmont arrived, her face white with shock. "My husband's portraits," she whispered. "Who would do such a thing?" "Someone very angry," Tuppence said. "Someone with a grudge against Roland specifically." Margaret Cavendish appeared from her room, still in her dressing gown despite the hour. "What's all the noise about?" "I was trying to rest," she stopped, seeing the ruined portraits. "Good God, Miss Cavendish," Tommy said pleasantly. "Where were you for the last hour?" Her eyes narrowed. "In my room. I had a headache and lay down after breakfast." "Why, these were done recently. The paint is still fresh where the canvas was cut." "And you think I did this?" "How dare you?" "I don't think anything yet," Tommy said. "I'm merely establishing everyone's whereabouts." "I was in the village," Roger Marchmont announced, arriving behind them out of breath. "Heard the commotion as I came in." "What's happened?" "Oh my God, those paintings! And I was in the rose garden with Dr. Thornton and the Beresfords," Eleanor added, which left, Tuppence realised, very few people unaccounted for. The servants, Lady Marchmont herself, and Margaret. "Mary," Lady Marchmont said shakily, "fetch Constable Williams. This has gone too far." But when Mary returned 20 minutes later, it was with worrying news. Constable Williams was unavailable, called away to a neighbouring village for an emergency. He wouldn't return until evening at the earliest. "We're on our own," Tommy murmured to Tuppence. "Not quite. We have something the blackmailer doesn't know we have. Sarah's diary and the buried box of evidence." "True. But we still don't know who has all the pieces of the puzzle." Dr. Thornton knew about the cover-up, but not about Arthur's bigamy. Eleanor knew something was wrong, but not what. Margaret witnessed the second marriage, but may not have known about the murder. Who knows everything? Or who, Tuppence said slowly, has recently found out everything. They spent the afternoon quietly investigating, speaking to each person individually, piecing together timelines and opportunities. By tea time, a picture was beginning to emerge. "The letters started 3 weeks ago," Tuppence said as they reviewed their notes. "What happened 3 weeks ago that might have prompted this?" "Lady Marchmont had Dr. Thornton here for her regular checkup," Tommy said, consulting his notes. "Eleanor visited to discuss the church fate. Margaret was here for several days, going through estate papers. And Roger was where? In London, according to him, but easily could have been here." They were interrupted by another summons, this time to the drawing room, where they found Lady Marchmont standing very straight, holding yet another letter. "This was in my tea tray," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. "Left there some time between when Cook prepared it and when Mary brought it up." The message was brief and chilling. "Tonight, the Rose Garden, midnight. Come alone with 500, or tomorrow everyone knows the truth about Roland, Arthur, and Sarah. This is your last chance." "They're forcing a confrontation," Tommy said. "Then I'll give them one," Lady Marchmont said with sudden steel in her voice. "I'll go. I'll pay. I just want this to end." "With respect, Lady Marchmont, that's exactly what they want," Tuppence said. "And you won't be going alone. We'll be there too, hidden. When the blackmailer comes for the money, we'll catch them. And if they're dangerous," Dr. Thornton asked, "if they've already pushed Eleanor, vandalized the portraits, who knows what they might do when cornered?" "Then," Tommy said grimly, "we'd better make sure we catch them before they have a chance to do anything worse." As they made their plans for the midnight meeting, none of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the hallway. listening to every word, making plans of their own. The stage was set for the final confrontation, and in the rose garden, where secrets had been buried for 28 years, the truth was finally ready to emerge, if anyone survived long enough to hear it. The hours between tea and midnight seemed to crawl by with agonizing slowness. Lady Marchmont insisted on maintaining normal appearances, so they dressed for dinner and made awkward conversation over the meal, though no one had much appetite. Tommy and Tuppence used the time to prepare meticulously. They checked the rose garden in the fading light, identifying potential hiding places and escape routes. The garden was enclosed on 3 sides by tall hedges, with the 4th side opening onto a small orchard. The central fountain provided some cover, as did a stone bench and a small garden shed nearly obscured by overgrown climbing roses. "I'll hide behind the fountain," Tommy decided. "It gives me clear views of all the paths leading into the garden. Tuppence, you take the shed. If our blackmailer tries to run, we'll have them boxed in." "What about the orchard? I'll ask Roger to watch that approach. He seems eager to help, and an extra pair of eyes won't hurt." They returned to the house as darkness fell completely. Lady Marchmont was in the drawing room, pale but composed, an envelope containing £500 in notes on the table beside her. "Are you certain you want to do this?" Dr. Thornton asked her for perhaps the 10th time. "We could still call the police properly, let them handle it." "No." Lady Marchmont's voice was firm. "I need to know who's doing this. I need to understand why. And—" She paused, her eyes filling with tears for the first time. "I need to know what Roland did. I've spent 28 years believing he was a good man. I need to hear the truth." Eleanor Fairfax, her arm still in its sling, reached over and squeezed her friend's hand. "Whatever the truth is, Sylvia, you're not responsible for Roland's actions." "Aren't I? I was his wife. I should have known. I should have seen." "You saw what he wanted you to see," Tuppence said gently. "Men like Roland are expert deceivers. That's why they get away with things for so long." At 11:30 they took their positions. The night was cold and clear, with a bright moon that cast sharp shadows across the garden. Tommy and Tuppence had dressed in dark clothing and moved silently to their hiding spots. Roger, excited despite the gravity of the situation, stationed himself at the edge of the orchard with strict instructions to remain hidden no matter what happened. Lady Marchmont came out at 5 minutes to midnight, the envelope clutched in her hand. She walked to the centre of the garden and stood by the fountain, her white dress making her clearly visible in the moonlight. The minutes ticked by. Midnight came and went. Nothing happened. Then, at 10 past midnight, a figure emerged from the shadows near the house. They moved slowly, carefully, their face obscured by a hooded coat. "Lady Marchmont," a voice called, deliberately pitched low and muffled. "Do you have the money?" "I have it," Lady Marchmont replied, her voice shaking only slightly. "But I want answers first. I want to know who you are, and what you think my husband did." "You know what he did?" The figure came closer. "He killed Sarah Whitmore's mother. He embezzled from his own estate. He covered up his crimes with lies and bribes. And when Sarah threatened to expose him, he nearly killed her too." "Then you know about Sarah," Lady Marchmont said. "You know she survived." There was a pause, and Tommy could sense the blackmailer's surprise. Yes, I know she survived." "Then you know that she lost her memory of that night. She doesn't even remember making those accusations. So why does any of this matter now? Why bring it all up after nearly 3 decades? "Because," the figure said, their voice rising with emotion, "justice still matters. Truth still matters. He got away with it, with all of it. He lived out his life in comfort while Sarah lost years of her memory, while Arthur fled in shame, while an innocent woman's death was covered up and forgotten. And what good will exposing it do now? Lady Marchmont asked. Roland is dead. Arthur is dead. Even Sarah's mother is long gone. All you'll accomplish is destroying whatever peace I have left in my final years. You deserve to suffer for benefiting from his crimes. The venom in those words told Tommy everything he needed to know. This wasn't just about justice or money. This was personal. Who are you? Lady Marchmont demanded. Show yourself! For a moment, Tommy thought the blackmailer would refuse. Then slowly they reached up and pulled back the hood. Margaret Cavendish stood revealed in the moonlight, her face twisted with rage and old pain. I loved him, she said, her voice breaking. I loved Roland with everything I had, and he barely saw me. He married you for your money, conducted an affair with Sarah, and never once looked at me as anything but his poor spinster relation. And then I discovered what he'd done. The murder, the embezzlement, the lies. And I realized the man I loved was a monster. You've known all along, Tuppence said, emerging from her hiding place. Tommy and Roger followed suit, forming a loose circle around Margaret. Margaret's laugh was bitter. Not all along. I suspected something was wrong that summer, but I didn't know what. It wasn't until 3 weeks ago that I finally understood. I was going through some old papers in the attic, estate documents that needed sorting, and I found Roland's private journal. He'd written everything down, every detail of his crimes, his guilt, his fear of discovery. It was like reading the confession of a stranger. So you decided to extract payment from Lady Marchmont, Tommy said. She benefited from his crimes. She lived in luxury funded by embezzled money, protected by murdered women's silence. Why shouldn't she pay? I didn't know, Lady Marchmont said quietly. Margaret, I swear to you, I didn't know. You should have known. You should have questioned, should have noticed. Margaret was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I was so angry, so hurt. And yes, I needed the money. The estate is bleeding money. And when Sylvia dies, it all comes to me anyway. Why shouldn't I have it now? Why shouldn't she suffer first, the way I've suffered? Is that why you pushed Eleanor down the hill? Tuppence asked. To frighten Lady Marchmont into paying? Margaret looked genuinely confused. I didn't push Eleanor. I swear I didn't. I wanted the money, yes, but I never intended physical harm to anyone. Then who did? Tommy demanded. Before anyone could answer, a sound from the house drew their attention. Breaking glass, followed by a shout. The house! Roger yelled. Someone's in the house! They ran together, Margaret forgotten in the sudden crisis. The commotion was coming from the library. When they burst through the door, they found Dr. Thornton struggling with another figure, both of them grappling near the fireplace. The figure broke free and whirled to face them, and Tuppence gasped. It was a woman in her late 40s with greying hair and haunted eyes that looked achingly familiar. Sarah, Lady Marchmont breathed. Sarah Whitmore! Sarah Marchmont, the woman corrected, her voice harsh. Or Sarah Fairfax. I've had so many names. But yes, I was Sarah Whitmore once, before your husband tried to kill me. You remember, Dr. Thornton said, still breathing hard. When? How? 3 months ago. I was in Australia, living under yet another assumed name, when I had a fall, another head injury. And suddenly it all came back. Everything from that summer, everything that had been taken from me. Her hands clenched. I came back to England to find answers, to make someone pay for what was done to me. You're the one who's been sending the letters, Tommy said. Some of them, Sarah admitted. I started with Lady Marchmont, thinking she must have known about Roland's crimes. But then I realized she was just another one of his victims. So I changed tactics. I came here under a false name, took a position in the village, and started watching, waiting, trying to understand what really happened that night. And you pushed Eleanor, Tuppence said. I did. Sarah's voice held no remorse. She knew the truth about Arthur's bigamy and said nothing. She benefited from my forced disappearance. She deserved to be frightened, and the portrait slashing. Tommy asked. That was me as well. I wanted to destroy every image of the man who destroyed my life. She turned to Lady Marchmont. I wanted you to feel what I felt, lost, confused, betrayed. But the more I watched, the more I realized you didn't know. You were as much his dupe as I was. Then why are you here tonight? Lady Marchmont asked gently. Because Dr. Thornton knew I was back. He spotted me in the village last week, recognized me despite the years. He tried to convince me to leave, said stirring up the past would only bring more pain. But I couldn't leave, not until I'd faced all of you, made you all acknowledge what was done to me. She swayed suddenly, and Dr. Thornton moved to steady her. You're ill, he said, his physician's eye taking in her pallor, the way she held herself. Dying, Sarah said simply. Cancer, 3 months left, perhaps 4. So you see, I have nothing left to lose. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Sarah, Lady Marchmont said, stepping forward, I cannot undo what was done to you. I cannot give you back the years you lost. But I can offer you something. Acknowledgement, truth, and whatever peace that might bring. Will you accept that? For a long moment, Sarah stood rigid. Then, slowly, she began to cry. Great wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Lady Marchmont crossed the room and, despite everything, took the woman in her arms. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I'm so very, very sorry. Outside, the first light of dawn was beginning to touch the horizon, and in the rose garden, the buried secrets of the past lay exposed at last. But there was still one more revelation to come. By the time the household had gathered in the drawing room, summoned by a grim-faced Tommy, the sun was fully up, though it brought little warmth to the cold room or to the faces assembled there. Sarah sat in a chair by the fire, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite her protests. Dr. Thornton stood nearby, his professional concern overriding his complicated history with her. Lady Marchmont sat with Eleanor, the two old friends united by shared shock. Margaret hovered by the window, her earlier bravado replaced by a wary apprehension. Roger had positioned himself by the door, as if afraid someone might try to flee. Tuppence and Tommy stood together near the mantelpiece, their expressions serious. I think, Tommy began, that it's time we laid out everything that happened that summer of 1897, and everything that's happened since. There are still pieces missing, and I believe everyone here has a part of the puzzle. Must we? Lady Marchmont asked wearily. Can't we simply let it rest now? Sarah has returned. The truth about Roland is known. What more is there? Justice, Sarah said quietly. There's still justice. Someone killed my mother, and that debt hasn't been paid. Your mother's death was an accident, Dr. Thornton said. Roland recorded as much in his journal. They argued, she fell. No. The word came from an unexpected source. Eleanor Fairfax. She stood shakily, her face ashen. No, that's not the whole truth. I've carried this secret for 28 years, and I won't carry it any longer. Everyone turned to stare at her. Eleanor? Lady Marchmont's voice was confused. What are you saying? I'm saying that I was there the night Sarah's mother died. I saw what happened. Eleanor's voice shook, but she continued. Arthur and I had quarrelled. One of our frequent rows about money or his attention to other women. I don't remember which. I went for a walk to cool my temper, and I heard raised voices from the east tower. When I looked up, I saw them in the window. Roland and a woman I didn't recognize then, but later learned was Sarah's mother. She paused, gathering herself. They were arguing. She was waving papers. I could see them in her hand. Roland tried to grab them. She pulled back, and then... Eleanor closed her eyes. And then Arthur appeared. He'd followed me, wanting to make peace. He rushed up the tower stairs, burst into the room. In the confusion, in the struggle, the woman fell. Arthur pushed her, Sarah said, her voice hollow. It was Arthur who killed my mother. It was an accident, Eleanor cried. He was trying to separate them, trying to prevent Roland from doing something violent. But she was too close to the open window, and when Arthur grabbed her arm to pull her away from Roland, she twisted, lost her balance, and fell. The room was utterly silent. Roland and Arthur came to me afterward. Eleanor continued, tears streaming down her face. They were panicked, terrified. They begged me to say nothing. Roland said he would handle everything. The coroner, the servants, the authorities. He said it had been an accident, that there was no point in ruining 3 lives over a tragic mischance. And She looked at Lady Marchmont with agony in her eyes. I agreed. I kept silent. And when Sarah came seeking the truth, Tommy said quietly, Arthur tried to protect himself by marrying her, even though he was already married to you, offering her security in exchange for her silence. But she wouldn't be silent, Eleanor said. She kept pressing, kept demanding answers. So Arthur and Roland arranged to meet her in the rose garden that final night. They were going to tell her the truth, or some version of it, try to make her understand it had been an accident, convince her to leave it in the past. And when I wouldn't agree, Sarah said, when I threatened to go to the authorities with what I knew, Roland attacked me. He struck me with something. A stone from the garden border, I think. I went down, and that's the last thing I remember until waking up in that London hospital with my memory gone. Arthur saved your life, Eleanor said. He stopped Roland from finishing what he'd started. He insisted they call Dr. Thornton, made sure you received care. But he was terrified the truth would come out, terrified he'd hang for a death that truly had been an accident. So they staged his death and sent him to South Africa, Tuppence said, where he died 2 years later, probably from guilt as much as fever. And I lived on, Eleanor said bitterly, keeping their secrets, pretending to be the grieving widow, all the while knowing I was complicit in covering up a woman's death and the attempted murder of another. Attempted murder by Roland, Tommy clarified. The man you all protected. I didn't protect him, Margaret burst out. I exposed him. I found his journal and started the blackmail to punish Sylvia for benefiting from his crimes. Except Lady Marchmont wasn't the only victim, Tuppence pointed out. Sarah was the real victim, and she received nothing. I didn't know Sarah was alive, Margaret said defensively. The journal said Roland thought he'd killed her. I had no idea Dr. Thornton had saved her. And when you realized Sarah had returned? Tommy asked. When you saw her in the village? Margaret went pale. I didn't know what to do. I was already committed to the blackmail. I thought if I could just get the money and leave before everything unravelled. But everything did unravel, Lady Marchmont said. Her voice was steady now, almost detached. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my husband, my marriage, all of it built on lies and murder and cowardice. She looked at Sarah. Can you ever forgive me? Not for what Roland did. I know I can't be held responsible for that. But for living in comfort all these years, never questioning, never knowing. Sarah studied the older woman for a long moment. You couldn't have known, she said finally. Roland deceived you as much as he did me. Perhaps more." She turned to Eleanor. "But you knew. You've known for 28 years, and you said nothing." "I know," Eleanor whispered. "I've lived with that guilt every day. It's eaten at me, destroyed me from inside. When you pushed me on that path, part of me was almost relieved. I thought perhaps this was my punishment at last." "It wasn't your mother's death alone that destroyed my life," Sarah said to Eleanor. "It was the silence afterward, the lies. If someone had simply told the truth, that it was an accident, that Arthur had tried to stop it, perhaps I would have had some peace. Instead, I spent years searching for answers that were being deliberately hidden. That's what I can't forgive." Roger, who had been silent throughout, suddenly spoke up. "So what happens now? Sarah's dying, Roland and Arthur are dead, and the rest of you are old women. What's the point of punishment or justice after all this time?" "The point," Tommy said, "is acknowledgement. The truth matters, even decades later. Perhaps especially decades later. And legally?" Dr. Thornton asked quietly. "What happens legally?" "That depends," Tommy said, looking at Sarah. "You're the only one with standing to press charges. For your mother's death, for the assault on you. But as Roger pointed out, the main perpetrators are already dead." "I don't want charges," Sarah said. "I want something else." She looked at Lady Marchmont. "I want my mother's death recorded properly. Not as an accident by a clumsy maid, but as the tragedy it was. I want her name cleared, and I want the truth known, at least among those who were there." "You shall have it," Lady Marchmont said. "I'll see to it personally, and more. I'll establish a fund in your mother's name, for women in service who are wronged or harmed. It won't undo what was done, but perhaps it will honour her memory." "And me?" Margaret asked nervously. "I did attempt blackmail." "You did," Tommy confirmed. "But you also helped expose the truth. I think perhaps if you were to return that £500 you took from the envelope during the confusion at midnight, and if you were to agree to help manage Lady Marchmont's charitable fund with proper oversight, we might consider the matter closed." Margaret sagged with relief. Yes, of course. "Thank you." "And I?" Eleanor asked. "What about my part in the cover-up?" "You've punished yourself enough," Lady Marchmont said firmly, "and your silence, while wrong, was motivated by love for Arthur and fear of scandal. You harmed no one directly. I harmed Sarah by keeping silent about her mother's death." "Yes," Sarah agreed, "but I'm too tired and too close to my own end to demand more suffering. Keep your guilt if you must, but add no more to the pile of sorrows this house has already seen." Dr. Thornton cleared his throat. "For what it's worth, I'm prepared to face any consequences for my part in hiding Sarah's injuries and helping stage Arthur's death. I've carried that guilt for 30 years. Perhaps it's time I answered for it." "I think," Tuppence said gently, "that you saved Sarah's life when Roland would have killed her. That should count for something. Besides," Roger added practically, "if we start prosecuting everyone involved, we'll have no one left to run the village. Half the county families have skeletons in their closets, if you dig deep enough." Despite everything, this brought a slight smile to several faces. "Then we're agreed?" Tommy asked, looking around the room. "The truth is acknowledged, amends will be made where possible, and justice, such as it can be after all these years, is served." One by one they nodded. As the gathering broke up, Sarah stood and approached Lady Marchmont one final time. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for believing me, for not trying to protect Roland's reputation at my expense." "My dear," Lady Marchmont said, taking her hands, "whatever else I may have been, I hope I've never been the sort of woman who protects monsters. Roland was my husband, and I loved him. but that doesn't make his actions forgivable. I wonder, Sarah said thoughtfully, if he ever regretted what he did. His journal suggests he did, Margaret said quietly. The last entry, written just before he died, said he hoped there would be no afterlife, because he couldn't face the women he'd wronged. Small comfort, Sarah said, but comfort nonetheless. As she turned to leave, supported by Dr. Thornton, who insisted on examining her properly, she paused at the door. "There's one thing I still don't understand," she said. "Who buried my belongings in the rose garden? I certainly didn't, and Roland would have burned them rather than preserve them." A long silence followed. Then Eleanor spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did. After you were taken away, after Arthur fled, I went to your room and gathered your things. I couldn't bear the thought of them being thrown out like rubbish, as if you'd never existed. So I packed them in a box and buried them beside the rose that bore your name, though you never knew it. My name? The Ispahan rose. Sarah was your mother's name too. Roland's grandmother planted it for her years before. When you came to work here, I thought it a sad irony that you were named for a rose planted in memory of another Sarah. A Sarah who had also served this house." Sarah stood very still. "My mother was named for a rose in this garden." "More than that," Eleanor said. "Your grandmother was Sarah Marchmont, Roland's grandmother. Your mother was born here in this house. You weren't just seeking justice, my dear. You were coming home." The revelation hung in the air like the last note of a song. Sad, sweet and unexpectedly final. Outside, the morning had become afternoon, and in the rose garden, the old Ispahan rose swayed in the autumn breeze, remembering all the Sarahs it had outlived and perhaps, finally, finding peace. They had thought the revelations were over. They had thought, with the confessions made and the truth finally exposed, that the drama was finished. They were wrong. It was Tuppence who first noticed something amiss. As the others dispersed, Lady Marchmont to her rooms to rest, Dr. Thornton escorting Sarah to the village doctor for a proper examination, Margaret retreating in shame. Tuppence had wandered back to the library, her mind still churning through all they'd learned. The journal Margaret had mentioned, Roland's private confession, should still be there, in the collection of estate papers. Tuppence wanted to see it for herself, to read in Roland's own words what had driven him to such actions. But when she reached the table where Margaret had been working, the papers were gone, not just disorganized or misplaced. Gone. The entire collection had vanished, including presumably the journal. "Tommy!" she called, and something in her voice brought him running. "What is it?" "The papers. Margaret's papers. They're gone." They looked at each other with growing alarm. "She took them," Tommy said. "While we were all distracted by Sarah's revelations, Margaret took the evidence." "But why? She'd already confessed to the blackmail. The journal would only corroborate what we already know." "Unless," Tommy said slowly, "there's something else in those papers, something Margaret didn't want us to see." They found Roger in the entrance hall, preparing to return to the village. "Have you seen your cousin Margaret?" Tuppence asked urgently. "She went out about 20 minutes ago. Said she needed to clear her head." "Why? What's wrong?" "Which direction did she go?" "Toward the rose garden, I think." "Is this about the blackmail? Because I'm sure she didn't mean—" But Tommy and Tuppence were already running. They found her in the rose garden, kneeling beside the spot where they'd unearthed Sarah's belongings. A small bonfire burned in an ornamental urn that had been dragged to the centre of the garden, and Margaret was methodically feeding papers into it. "Stop!" Tuppence cried out. Margaret looked up, her face streaked with tears and soot. "I can't let anyone see these. I can't." Tommy grabbed the nearest papers before she could burn them. A mixture of letters and what looked like financial documents. As he scanned them, his expression changed from anger to shock. "Good Lord," he breathed. "Tuppence, look at this." The papers told a story neither of them had anticipated. Yes, there was Roland's journal, chronicling his crimes and his guilt. But there were also letters. Letters from Margaret's father to Roland, and Roland's replies. The correspondence revealed a secret that had been buried even deeper than murder. Margaret wasn't simply Roland's niece. She was his daughter. "I found them last month," Margaret said dully, watching the flames consume the evidence of her parentage. "I always wondered why my parents waited so long to have children, why my mother sometimes looked at me with such sadness. Now I know. My mother, my supposed mother, was barren, but she wanted a child desperately, wanted to cement her position in the family. So Roland obliged, secretly of course, a convenient solution for everyone. Except you," Tuppence said softly. "Except me. I spent my whole life in love with a man who was actually my father. I watched him from afar, yearned for his attention, hated his wife for having what I couldn't. And all the while, he knew, and he never told me." "Did Lady Marchmont know?" Tommy asked. "No, the letters make that clear. It was kept secret from everyone except my supposed parents and Roland. Even my mother's sister never guessed." Margaret laughed bitterly. So much deception in this family, so many secrets layered on secrets. "Margaret," Tuppence said gently, "destroying those papers won't change anything. The truth is still the truth. But no one else needs to know. Lady Marchmont doesn't need to know her husband fathered a child with her sister-in-law. Sarah doesn't need to know that while Roland was killing her mother and assaulting her, he was also deceiving his own daughter. Can't we just let some secrets stay buried?" Before either of them could answer, a new voice spoke from the edge of the garden. "No more secrets." Lady Marchmont stood there, leaning heavily on Roger's arm. She looked older than she had that morning, as if each revelation had aged her another year. "I heard what you said, Margaret, and I think I've known, deep down, for a very long time. The way Roland looked at you sometimes, the way he insisted on supporting your education, your endeavours. I told myself it was family feeling, but it was more than that, wasn't it?" Margaret stood slowly, the last of the papers clutched in her hand. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant— I know." Lady Marchmont's voice was kind despite everything. "You're as much a victim in this as anyone. More, perhaps, because you lost not just truth, but identity." "But the shame," Margaret whispered. "The scandal, if anyone knew, will be managed," Lady Marchmont said firmly, "just as everything else has been managed. But no more lies, Margaret. No more burning evidence and hiding truths. If this family is going to survive, if we're going to honour all the Sarahs and all the others who were hurt by our secrets, then we must be honest, even when it's painful, especially when it's painful." She held out her hand, and after a moment, Margaret crossed to her and placed the remaining papers in it. "These are yours now," Margaret said. "Do with them what you will." Lady Marchmont looked at the papers, then at the small fire still burning in the urn. "I think," she said slowly, "that some of this does need to burn. The financial records of Roland's embezzlement, the details of affairs and betrayals that serve no purpose but to hurt. But your letters, the ones your father wrote to his brother about you, those should be kept. You deserve to know that he cared for you, even if he showed it badly." She sorted through the papers with surprising briskness, setting aside a small bundle and handing the rest to Margaret. Burn these if you wish. But keep those. They're your history, whatever else they may be." Margaret took them with shaking hands. "Thank you. I don't deserve your kindness." "Perhaps not. But you'll have it anyway. It's what one does in families, isn't it? Even families as deeply flawed as ours." As Margaret fed the last of the papers to the fire, Roger spoke up for the first time. "I say, this means Margaret is technically entitled to inherit part of the estate, doesn't it? If she's Uncle Roland's daughter." "Legally, no," Tommy said. "She was born within a marriage to another man, which makes her legally her supposed father's child. But morally—" He looked at Lady Marchmont. "Morally," Lady Marchmont said, "Margaret is already my heir. That doesn't change. What does change is that she's no longer my niece by law, but my stepdaughter by blood. It's a strange sort of promotion, but there it is." Despite everything, this drew a watery smile from Margaret. "There's one more thing," Tuppence said quietly. "If Roland was Margaret's father, and if Sarah's grandmother was also a Marchmont, that makes Margaret and Sarah cousins," Margaret finished. "Distant, but still related. Good God, what a tangle!" "A family tree that's more like a family thicket," Roger observed. "Absolutely impenetrable." The fire had burned down to embers now, and the autumn wind was scattering the ashes across the rose beds. Tommy watched them settle, thinking of all the secrets this garden had held, and how they'd finally been released. "What will you tell people?" he asked Lady Marchmont. "About Sarah? About the blackmail? About everything?" "The truth," she said simply, "or as much of it as needs to be told. Sarah's mother died in a tragic accident involving my husband and his cousin. Sarah herself was injured but survived and has now returned. As for the rest—" She gestured to the ashes. "The rest is family business, and families are entitled to some privacy. And Sarah," Tuppence asked, "what will happen to her?" "She'll stay here, of course," Lady Marchmont said, "for whatever time she has left. She's family too, after all, more family than she ever knew. It's the least I can do." "That's very generous," Margaret said quietly. "It's merely just," Lady Marchmont corrected, "and I've been unjust through ignorance and passivity for far too long." As they walked back to the house together, an unlikely group bound by secrets and truths in equal measure, Tuppence caught Tommy's eye and smiled. "Well," she murmured, "I'd say that wraps up all the loose ends." "Does it?" Tommy murmured back. "I can't help but feel we're missing something, some final piece of the puzzle." But what that piece might be, neither of them could guess. It wouldn't be until later that evening, when they gathered for dinner, that the final revelation would come. And it would be the most shocking of all. 3 days later, Tommy and Tuppence sat in the drawing room of their Mayfair flat, tea things spread before them, and the afternoon sun slanting through the windows. The Times lay folded on the table, its headline carefully neutral. "Historic. Marchmont Estate to open museum honouring women in service." "Well," Tuppence said, pouring tea with the satisfaction of someone who'd earned it, "I'd say that's a rather elegant solution to a very messy problem." Lady Marchmont handled it brilliantly, Tommy agreed, acknowledging the tragedy without exposing all the sordid details. Sarah's mother will be honoured. Sarah herself has a purpose for her remaining months, and the family's reputation is preserved. As much as it deserves to be, Tuppence added with a touch of tartness. 3 days ago, Just as they'd been preparing to leave Meadowbrook Manor, the final surprise had arrived in the form of a telegram from Australia. It was from Sarah's solicitor, and it contained extraordinary news. Arthur Fairfax hadn't died in 1899 after all. He'd lived on in South Africa for another 20 years, under the name Samuel Whitmore, adopting his deceased wife's maiden name as his own. And when he'd finally died in 1919, he'd left a substantial sum of money he'd earned legitimately in the diamond trade, to be held in trust until his first wife, Eleanor, passed away, and then to be given to Sarah, if she could be found, or failing that, to charity. The solicitor had been searching for Sarah for years, following a trail that had led from London to Australia and back again. Only by the merest coincidence had he learned of her return to England, and specifically to Ashford-on-Thames. So, in the end, Tommy mused, Arthur did try to make amends. 20 years late, and in the most cowardly way possible, but still. It's something, Tuppence allowed. Sarah will be comfortable for whatever time she has left. That's more than she had before. And Eleanor? Lady Marchmont told me she's taking the news surprisingly well. Apparently, knowing that Arthur felt genuine remorse has lifted a weight she didn't even know she was carrying. Tommy selected a biscuit and considered it thoughtfully. You know, when we arrived at Meadowbrook Manor, I thought we were dealing with a simple case of blackmail. It's never simple, is it? Tuppence said. Once you start pulling on threads, the whole tapestry begins to unravel. Rather, a grim tapestry in this case. Murder, embezzlement, bigamy, assault, decades of lies. And yet, Tuppence interrupted, also love. Eleanor loved Arthur despite everything. Margaret loved Roland. Sarah loved the truth enough to risk everything for it. Even Lady Marchmont loved her husband, and she's choosing to honour that love by being honest about his failings. You're going philosophical on me. Someone has to. You're entirely too practical sometimes, Tommy. He smiled and reached for her hand. That's why we work so well together. I keep you grounded, and you keep me from being insufferably boring. You could never be boring, darling. Insufferable occasionally, but never boring. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the autumn light fade over London. Do you think, Tommy asked suddenly, that we did the right thing? Not pushing for more official involvement, letting the family handle it privately? Tuppence considered. And I think we gave justice where it could be given, and mercy where it was needed. That's the best anyone can do, really. Dr. Thornton will carry on as the village physician. Eleanor will continue as Lady Marchmont's companion. Margaret will manage the estate and the new museum. It's all very neat. Too neat? Tuppence caught the note in his voice. Just neat enough to make me wonder what we missed. You think there's still something hidden? I think, Tommy said slowly, that houses like Meadowbrook Manor never give up all their secrets. We solved the mystery we were asked to solve. We answered the questions that were asked. But I can't help wondering what questions no one thought to ask. Tuppence shivered slightly, though the room was warm. Don't. You'll give me nightmares. Sorry, it's just that. He paused. Did you notice, in Roland's journal, there was a page torn out, right at the end, just before his last entry? Margaret said she thought it had been damaged by damp, but the page edges looked clean, as if it had been removed deliberately. What do you think was on it? I don't know, and that bothers me. They fell silent again, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Tuppence set down her teacup with a decisive click. Well, whatever secrets remain at Meadowbrook Manor, they're not our concern anymore. Lady Marchmont has our number if she needs us again. For now, I'm content to let sleeping mysteries lie." "Are you really?" she laughed. "No, of course not. I'll probably lie awake tonight wondering about that torn page. But I'll try to be content. That's all I can ask." A companionable silence settled over them as they finished their tea. Outside, London was coming alive with evening lights and traffic. Inside, the cosy flat was warm and safe. "You know," Tuppence said after a while, "I do wonder about one thing. Only one. All right, several things, but primarily this. That Ispahan rose, the one Sarah was named for, the one Sarah's mother was named for, the one planted by Roland's grandmother. What about it? Lady Marchmont said Roland's grandmother planted it in memory of another Sarah, a Sarah who had served the house. But what if there's more to that story? What if the secrets at Meadowbrook Manor go back even further than 1897? Tommy groaned. "Please don't. I've just managed to stop thinking about torn journal pages." "I'm only saying every generation seems to have its Sarah and its secrets. It's almost like a pattern." Or, Tommy suggested practically, Sarah was simply a popular name in Victorian England, and we're seeing patterns where none exist. Perhaps, but wouldn't it be interesting to research the Marchmont family tree? To see if... No, absolutely not. We solved one mystery. That's enough for this month. It's been a week, precisely. Much too soon to take on another case. Tuppence smiled and settled back into the sofa. "You're probably right. Though, if Lady Marchmont did happen to call and ask us to investigate her family history, then we'd discuss it like rational people before making any commitments. Naturally." They exchanged a look, and both started laughing. "We'd be there in a heartbeat, wouldn't we?" Tommy admitted. "Absolutely. We're hopeless. Incurably curious. Professionally nosy. It's what makes us good at what we do, and what makes us terrible at resting on our laurels." Tommy raised his teacup in a toast. "To terrible rest and incurable curiosity, then." Tuppence clinked her cup against his, "and to mysteries solved, and mysteries yet to come." As they drank, neither noticed the evening post that had arrived while they were talking. It lay on the hall table, waiting to be discovered. A cream-coloured envelope with elegant handwriting and a Meadowbrook Manor postmark. Inside was a brief note from Lady Marchmont, and a small, pressed flower, a bloom from the Ispahan rose, carefully preserved. The note read simply, "Thank you for bringing truth to light. But as you may have guessed, light always casts shadows. If you ever wish to know more about my husband's grandmother and the first Sarah, I believe I've found her diary in the attic. It makes for fascinating reading. No urgency, of course, but perhaps someday when you're not too busy. Yours, Sylvia Marchmont." The flower was lovely, even dried and pressed. Its petals were the colour of old secrets and new beginnings. But Tommy and Tuppence wouldn't find it until tomorrow morning. For now, they sat in their warm flat, drinking tea and watching the evening deepen over London, satisfied with a case well solved and a mystery well ended. Or as well ended as mysteries ever really are. In the rose garden at Meadowbrook Manor, the autumn wind rustled through the Ispahan rose's branches. It had outlived 3 Sarahs now, had witnessed murders and secrets, and finally, after so many years, truth. How many more secrets it held, And how many more Sarahs would walk through that garden seeking answers? Only time would tell. But then, that's the thing about secrets and roses both. They have a way of surviving, buried but not dead, waiting for the right moment to bloom again. And somewhere in the night, in a drawer in a flat in Mayfair, a telegram waited to be discovered. Another case, another mystery, another call to adventure. But that, as they say, is another story. For now, the cipher in the shadows had been solved. The truth had emerged from darkness into light, and Tommy and Tuppence Beresford could rest, at least until tomorrow.